Hey guys, welcome to Ryan's Running Reviews. I'll save you all some time and give you a quick rundown. Provision 7 is very similar to its predecessor, Midsole, exactly the same, Outsole, same as well. However, the entire upper has been completely redesigned and we do go down about half an ounce. So yeah, let's get into the details. Here we go. Before we begin, I do want to say that these shoes were provided to me by Roadrunner Sports. However, they didn't have a chance to preview this video, and this file synopsis is my own. I'd also like to say please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing. Here we go. The Altra Provision 7 is a mid-cushion stability shoe that just makes basically an upper update to the Provision 6, which I'll bring in here. You can see they look very similar, and we'll get into the exact details of how it changed. But I will say the Provision 6 is my wife's favorite shoe. She works in healthcare, she's on her feet all day, and she has 2 pairs of these. And I also gave a pair to my mom, and she absolutely loves them as well. So the Provision is a very popular shoe in my family and in the general public, as well as I think this is one of Altra's best-selling shoes. So all of that being said, this is also a very versatile shoe as well, so it works well for running, but it's also a nice shoe for weightlifting, sports, and a whole host of other activities. I've actually taken it hiking as well because I forgot my hiking shoes and I hiked in the Provision and it worked quite well. So this shoe I think is a great option for all-around use and not just running, because it is such kind of a well-balanced shoe because of that zero drop, wide forefoot, great tread on the outsole, and a very stable midsole. And if you're not familiar with Altra, they definitely do things differently. They have a balanced shoe or a zero drop shoe where the heel is level with the forefoot. So most other shoes have a little bit more in the heel for anywhere between a 5 to 12 millimeter drop, depending on the brand. Altra, all their shoes have a zero drop from heel to toe. So you're basically kind of like a barefoot stance, perfectly flat, or as they call it, balanced. And the other thing is they have this wide toe box, which allows your toes to kind of splay out once they hit the ground. And they have 3 different kinds of foot shapes, which is what Altra calls them. They have the original, which is the widest, standard, which is the one we're taking a look at today here on the Provision 7, which hasn't changed from the Provision 6. It's still that standard foot shape. And then they have the slim shape, which is found more on their racing shoes. And as far as the stats go, it's 28 millimeters in the heel, 28 in the forefoot for a zero drop. And just like last year, same exact setup, same exact stack height. However, what did change between the Provision 6 and the Provision 7 is the weight. So the 6 weighed, I believe, 10.1 ounces, while the 7 comes in at 9.6. So we come down about half an ounce with the update here from the 6 to the 7. And we'll actually bring in the Paradigm as well, as it's basically the beefed up version of the Provision. So the Paradigm has 30 millimeters in the heel and forefoot, which is 2 more millimeters of cushion, and it comes in a little bit heavier at 10.8 ounces again compared to the 10.6 here with the Provision 7. So you get a little bit more weight here and a little bit more midsole as well. The midsole on the Paradigm is also Ego Max, which is going to be softer and bouncier compared to the Ego Foam here on the Provision. And speaking of the midsole, we'll compare them as they are pretty much the exact same. Now it's still Ego Foam, which kind of falls into the lineup of Altra's foam. So you have Ego Foam, what we're taking a look at today. You have Ego Max, which we see here on the Paradigm, a little bit softer, a little bit bouncier. And then you have Ego Pro, which you see on like the Vanish Carbon, which is their bounciest and most energetic foam. So it kind of gets progressively bouncier or more energized as you go up the scale. So the Ego Foam here, it provides a nice level of cushion, but isn't as bouncy or as soft as some of their more scaled up foam. So I think this works well in a stability shoe because you don't want too much squish or softness, and because the guide rails here aren't too massive, it's good to have a slightly more firm experience, even though it does give you a nice level of cushion. It's just not super bouncy. There's not a ton of energy return here. Now, I mentioned guide rails. Guide rails are essentially these walls of foam on the medial side. You kind of have them on the lateral side. Your foot kind of sinks down a little bit lower here. It's just not as pronounced as we see like with like the Paradigm and other guide rail systems. So there is a noticeable guide rail here towards the back part of the medial side and kind of a mini one on the lateral side as your foot sinks down into that Ego Foam. It really does kind of cradle your foot. Now, what's nice about guide rails is they really don't impact your motion unless you kind of hit or run into them. So it's not like a posting mechanism. There's no dual density foams here. It's a very consistent feel, and then you just kind of have those walls of foam that give you guidance towards the back half of the shoe if you need it, which I quite like. Moving on to the outsole, it's exactly the same from the 6 to the 7. The pattern is identical. Now it's a unique outsole because you have a ton of rubber coverage here with these small individual lugs, which give you great grip and excellent durability. Now, as far as the downsides go, this outsole does make a ton of noise on the ground just because these individual little lugs hit against each other and kind of have a unique sound on certain surfaces. So it's a very loud shoe because of this outsole, and little rocks and debris love to get stuck in all these little nooks and crannies. So that is a negative. You will have to kind of pick out rocks every now and then. But durability, traction, I thought was superb. The other interesting thing that Altra does with their outsoles is they have something called Intraflex, which is, you can see here, it's supposed to have these different lines that correspond to the bones and tendons in your foot. I don't know if that's absolutely the case, just because you have quite a bit of foam here, and it moves like a regular shoe, but I don't think it's anything that, different compared to other outsoles. Just I didn't notice a massive difference. So kind of a little bit of a marketing thing going on there, but I think the outsole here works very well and has great grip. Moving on to the upper, this is where all the changes took place, and they are quite noticeable and brought the shoe down almost half an ounce. Now, the first thing is the toe box. They made the material a little bit less flimsy, so they pulled it across a little bit more tightly. So if you take a look and compare the two between the 6 and the 7, you can see the material in the toe box is a little bit more flimsy. Breathability, still engineer mesh, thought it was about the same. The other big change they did was the heel counter. They made it a little bit more narrow here on the 7, more like a V-shaped. They did the same thing on the Torin 6, which is over there in the corner, to try to give you a better fit. Now, I thought the fit on the 6 was quite good. I was quite happy with it, but it is going to be a more snug experience here with the 7, kind of across the whole platform. They just kind of brought the upper in just a tad bit more. It's not a massive change, but it is going to be a slightly more secured experience compared to the 6. The other interesting thing is on the 6, they had this piece of material that kind of wraps around the medial side of your foot. It's supposed to give you a little bit more support. Personally, didn't notice it, didn't use it, didn't want it, and I think Altra kind of saw that as well, and they just took it out. So there's no more medial strap like we saw on the 6, and now it's just kind of your typical engineer mesh, kind of a two-layered approach here, engineer mesh towards the front half, and a kind of a more synthetic material towards the back half. Now, as far as the heel counter goes, it's still kind of the same level of resistance. It's just going to be a little bit more narrow and a little bit more pared down, as it was quite tall on the Paradigm 6. Provision 6. The other thing is the tongue. Tongue is still non-gusseted, but has been brought back in a little bit more. It was incredibly tall and just wide on the 6, and now is going to be a little bit less cumbersome here on the 7, as it has about the same amount of padding. However, they did add these large holes throughout the tongue for additional ventilation, and just brought it in a little bit more. So it's less tall, less annoying, and I think it works quite well with roughly the same amount of padding. The lacing system was also updated. They did remove one lace slot with 6 different holes for whatever lacing setup you would like. They also changed the type of laces. It's now kind of the more traditional, slightly rounded ones, while previously it was that fabric flat lace setup. So I thought the lockdown was great here on the 7. It fits true to size, slightly more snug in the back half of the shoe, and a slightly less voluminous forefoot, just because there's a little bit less material there. But overall, wouldn't make any size adjustments. It just fits the same, just a little bit more snug compared to the previous version, which I was quite happy with that lockdown and fit. I was actually quite happy to see them reduce the tongue and kind of take away some of the meaningless pieces like that medial side strap. So the shoe lost almost half an ounce, and I think I know for a fact that all that came from the upper, since the midsole is the same, and we can see that here with how they changed the setup. So at the end of the day, the Provision 7 is identical to the 6 with regard to the ride, as the midsole and outsole is exactly the same. However, the upper experience has changed quite a bit, as we do get a more narrow heel counter, a little bit more pared down as well. It's not as tall as the Provision 6. We also have less volume to the upper, as it's a little bit more supported and not as floppy compared to the previous version. They also removed some pointless pieces like that medial strap we saw here on the 6. They took away an extra lace slot, did change the laces, and made the tongue less bulky and cumbersome, which I was quite happy to see, because that was one of my biggest complaints on the Provision 6. The only thing I'll say is if you're someone who wants a softer experience, you can also take a look at the Paradigm, and we'll kind of bring that in, as well as it does have a couple more millimeters of stack height, and the Ego Max foam, which I find to be much softer and bouncier. It does provide a much more, luxurious experience. Now, with that more soft, more plush ride, you do give up some of the versatility that I think the Provision gives you, where you can kind of weightlift in this shoe, play sports in this shoe, walk in this shoe, hike in this shoe, and run in this shoe. Well, I probably wouldn't do that in the Paradigm. So that is something to keep in mind. It's also a little bit of a bulkier shoe and much heavier. I think almost like a full ounce heavier compared to this new Provision. So it's kind of confusing. I may have mixed it up in this video. This is the Provision, this is the Paradigm, but essentially this is the bigger, bulkier stability version of the Provision. So that's something I would probably try to keep in mind when trying to pick out which Altra shoe is right for you. But I am quite a fan of using Altra shoes for my casual and just kind of all-around use, because I love the zero drop and wide toe box, and it works really well for me outside of just purely running. So if you're someone who might not be a full-on runner and you want one shoe to kind of do it all, I would take a good look at the Provision 7, as it does a good job of kind of handling a wide range of activities in a very stable and responsible way. The one big caveat, like I mentioned before, it's just not not as soft or as plush as the Paradigm. So if you want a little bit more of a plush, more luxurious ride, go with the Paradigm. If you want something a little more stable, a little more versatile, go with the Provision. So let me know down in the comments, what do you think of Altra in general, and what do you think of this new update? I would love to hear from you. Well, I'm Ryan from Ryan's Running Reviews, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.